into other places to poll people for. Maybe ZecHub can ask some folks what they want to learn about. And for me, it's sort of a learn by teaching Feynman style kind of thing. So I like to just, have the community pick a topic, then I'm go and learn about it. But in this case, the topic is very complicated in some respects, and it's good to pull in a heavy hitter like Daira to go over things. We're going to go over the quantum recoverability zip because quantum is hot right now and people want to learn about it, and they want to learn about how Zcash is going to protect them from quantum computers. And this is a cool piece of the whole puzzle here. But yeah, does anybody have any questions about the format or about the office hours in general before we get into the main event here?
Just a general comment that this is my favorite format, and it's great for learning, and just how would you guys like to structure the questions? Because I'm assuming there'll be a lot. Do you want to wait till the end, or?
Yeah, I think there's a slide towards the end that is for questions. There's like the meat of the presentation, then there's like thank you and QA slides, and then there's some bonus slides after that in case people want to stick around. We're sticking like 60 to 90 minutes probably.
Yeah. If you want to put questions in the chat, then I can decide what's a good place to address those questions.
Perfect. Yeah, I could do that.
Okay, this is great. We're getting a lot of people coming in here. We also shout out to Zcash Brazil, who are rebroadcasting this on the Discord and translating it to a number of other languages too.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
Good luck with the technical translations. I'm sure it's fine.
Be like me trying to speak Spanish in Mexico City last week. You see everything in Spanish.
I'm trying to learn.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn Spanish. But
cool.
I don't have that much time to learn languages.
My friend's from Puerto Rico, and his impression of American is "Donde es parking?" Just toss the word in there. That's what they can do with the mathy type stuff. Just say the word.
Just to explain the views of Manchester behind me, I got caught in traffic, so I will be home in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, we're just kicking around.
I think people are. Sorry, can you still hear me? I think people are still joining, so we should maybe wait a few minutes more anyway.
Yeah, that sounds good. Question for folks too, and maybe this is a ZecHub question as well. If anybody wants to take the recordings of these and make cool little clips of them, like 1 minute or less, vertical, the whole 9 yards, the whole TikTokification thing, get in touch with me, because I would love if somebody could do that. Those would be really cool to have.
Yeah, I'm totally happy to help with that. I just want to make sure everyone's okay with, we have consent to do that. So just let me know if you don't want that.
You have consent from me, but just to ensure technical accuracy, can you run past run the actual thing you're going to quote past me, and so I can make sure it's not out of context?
Yeah, not a problem.
Quoted out of context too many times. I'm a bit sensitive about it.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually, because we don't want to be inaccurate either to cause confusion. So good call out.
Perfect. And also put in the chat topics that you would be interested in learning for the 4th office hours as well. And I will do my best to either learn about it or find a co-host that can explain it better than I can.
Yeah, I'm literally 2 minutes away, so Yeah, you have to wait 2 minutes.
Cool.
Let's think. So what background do people have in either well, probably not many people have a background in quantum cryptography specifically, but what background in cryptography?
Maybe do a thumbs up or something, or a clap if you have a background in cryptography. Here we go.
You have to count the thumbs up because I can't
There was one.
see
There
everyone.
was exactly one thumbs up.
One. Okay. All right. Okay. So I guess, oops, beep.
Yeah, I got a background in math, but not specifically cryptography.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the background in math will be useful for a few slides. But let's see. Okay. Yeah, I can work with this. I will just go a little bit more slowly over some parts of it.
Let's see a thumbs up for just a general technical background, or a programming background or something like that. Okay, now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most people, I would say, now are technically minded.
Okay, yeah.
We have some basis
yeah,
there.
a lot of it is going to be talking about technical trade-offs and yeah. Sorry for the delay. Yeah, I'm just going to be home in a minute.
Idea for next workshop: developer setups. What works? Why do you prefer? What do you use? Oh, that would be a good one. I would love to see everybody's different approaches to this.
Yeah, because like half the battle is setting up so you're comfortable, and I think it's always like checking the index or figure it out on your own, but no one actually talks about it. So I think it's a fun topic.
Yeah, I'll share the recording. Office Hours number 2 was building Zcash apps, and it was sort of touched upon this. It was like everything you need to know to start making something. I wasn't overly prescriptive in like how you run the processes. For example, Zebra or the indexer. Some people like to use Docker locally, some people don't, etc. But it was just getting your head around the primitives and kind of what you need to do.
And also like IDEs, what software do you use?
Yeah.
Do you prefer terminals? Do you prefer a GUI? The trade-offs of going different directions.
Yeah, and now also lately is what is your relationship with AI and how you use that or don't use that for doing these sort of things.
Yeah. And then for the privacy implications of AI is not private by default by any means. So that's a fun topic.
Although there's a lot of cool, I've been spending a lot of time on the local LLM subreddit. And these people are all just these like mad scientists, lab chefs cooking up all sorts of llama and making little harnesses for their Mistrals and their Quens and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. It's very creative and fun to see.
Yeah, I also just like it from from a learning perspective, because I believe everyone learns in a different way, slightly. So, so what works for one person will be disastrous for another. So I just think it's interesting to talk about and share.
Okay, just bear with me a minute.
All right. Well, Daira gets set up. Imagine a world where it's a dystopian future and quantum computers are attacking the blockchain. They're attacking Zcash, the one we all know about. And the decision is made to disable the Orchard pool because it's just too dangerous. To protect user funds, we need to disable it. What happens then? That's the premise of this talk. And this is a presentation of ZIP 2005, I believe, or 2004. No, I was right, 2005, which is a proposal for Orchard Quantum Recoverability, which means that even in a situation where you end up in that dystopian future I described, what can you do from there to recover your notes? There was also a good explainer about this from ZK Dragon. I'll post that in the chat, but I would not recommend. I'm tempted to post it later because I don't want people reading it and watching this at the same time, but I'll trust you to be adults and share the link with you now. So that's an a textual explainer of some of this. Daira, I am not 100% confident that it's going to be technically correct, but it's another thing you can point to regarding this. Personally, I would defer to the slides. I think the slides are going to be the most authoritative source on this thing, as it's coming directly from the ZIP author, and the ZIP author, by my estimation, seems to know what they're talking about. So without further ado, Daira Hopwood, the stage is yours. Thank you so much for attending and for co-hosting this.
You're welcome. Okay, next slide. I guess people probably already know who I am. This talk is dedicated to a trans woman who was murdered recently, a close friend of one of my friends. And it happens way too often. And it needs to stop. So next slide. Okay, so I think there's a lot of skepticism about whether quantum computers will sort of really work. And if you look at some of the press releases coming out of sort of the usual suspects, Google and so on, I can understand that skepticism because they're not always very careful about what they claim. They're written in marketing language very often. But yes, quantum computers are real. I'm sort of satisfied from the experiments that, hang on. So let's see. I have to manually admit guests, apparently. Okay. Yeah, I don't know how to fix that. Anyway, so yes, quantum computers are real. The experiments that have been done have convinced me of that. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that later. And so I'm going to assume that people don't have very much sort of background in quantum cryptography or quantum computing in general. This talk is based on one that was presented at ZBoot 2026, but I guess most of the people here won't have been there because it was invite only. And this is also focused on quantum recoverability so specifically rather than quantum Zcash in general. And there's easily enough to talk about there. Carry on. Yeah. So the history of, by the way, you're not in presentation mode. I can still see the URL at the top. Don't worry if it's too difficult.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to do it.
Okay, it's fine. Yeah. So the history of this is that so quantum computing was known theoretically to be kind of potentially a different computation model. But this researcher, Daniel Simon, was trying to prove that they couldn't obtain an exponential speed up. And he found a counterexample, even a very simple counterexample. And so this is a block diagram. You don't need to know the details here. But he submitted a paper about this, and it was rejected, as basically every sort of groundbreaking paper is rejected from a conference. So next slide. And the reason it was rejected was that sort of the reviewers weren't convinced that that this was an interesting algorithm, that it solved an interesting problem. But his supervisor, Peter Shaw, noticed that the problem had a very similar structure to certain number theory problems. Actually, we're going to look at the original problem so in the next couple of slides. If you show it to a cryptographer, it's kind of obviously interesting, potentially. But the reviewers didn't see it. And it took Peter Shaw to notice that, that yes, this is very closely related to some interesting problems like factoring and discrete logarithm. And you can generalize it to work on any finite abelian group. Basically, a group is an abstract mathematical structure where you can multiply. It has identities, and you can take inverses. And so we can use this for cryptography, like discrete log-based cryptography, because it's hard to go. So we go one-way operation is multiplying a base point by a secret key. You see the public key, and it's hard to go backwards. So the original journal that that Simon tried to publish in missed out on the one of the best computer science papers of 50 years. Okay, so this algorithm is the main intuition for a whole class of quantum algorithms that achieve exponential speedups. And you can adapt this to factoring, discrete log, basically any group-based cryptography, or ring in the case of factoring. Okay. So next slide. So this is the problem, and it looks very sort of cryptographic in its flavor. So we've got a black box function f, and it has a certain type of collision where the inputs have a fixed difference. So basically, you're saying that you've really got sort of two functions there that are shifted, and the shift distance is unknown. And the problem that we've got to solve is to find the shift distance. And the original problem, so the setting was bit strings. This difference function was XOR. And the problem was to decide whether this actually did have this hidden shift structure or not. So obviously, if S is 0, then that's just the same as not having these collections. But if we replace the possible shifts with a subgroup, then this becomes a hidden subgroup problem, which has this relation to other mathematical problems like factoring and discrete log. And so under the assumption that F is a black box, so we can say things about what the sort of complexity, the classical complexity, so not using quantum computer, should be, and it's the order of square root n. As n is the group size. Sorry, n is the number of subgroups. But basically, this, if for a prime order group, for example, this would be the group size. Okay, and you can, so we know that this bound is tight for classical algorithms on black box groups because we actually have an algorithm, parallel collision search, that achieves this bound. Okay, next slide. So we need some physics here. I'll try to use as little physics as possible. Actually, just in a second, I'm going to put the light on because it's a bit.
Daira, is it safe to say from your previous slide that if an algorithm falls within those bounds, just the primary intuition is that the algorithm that falls within those bounds, the quantum computer can solve it, so to speak, in square root time.
No, so the square root time is for a classical black box algorithm. So this is a well-known bound on solving discrete log in prime order groups of a given size if you're not allowed to use the group structure, for example. So does that make sense? Whereas a quantum computer is going to be able to do it faster.
Okay, yeah, that was just the main thing I was after.
Yeah, so the bound is for black box groups. So for example, discrete logarithms in a finite field, the field has extra structure, which you can use in index calculus algorithms, and so you can break it faster that way. But the interesting thing about the quantum algorithm is that it's going to work in polynomial time. Okay. So, first of all, are there any questions about that? And do we have any questions in the chat? No, I don't think so. Okay, that's fine. I think you're still screen sharing. Oh, no, you're not. That's fine. Okay. So if you have a quantum computer, then it works in terms of amplitude. So actually, this is true of quantum theory in general. So to model the configuration of a quantum system, you take every possible configuration and assign it an amplitude. But this is not a real number. This is it's kind of a point on a sphere, essentially. And so that's, well, a bit more complicated than that. It's actually a complex number squared isomorphic to that. And so there's this constraint that the sum of the norms of the amplitude, so the norm is effectively the distance from the origin, essentially, sum to 1. So this works a little bit like probability, but it's not probability. And we'll see how it's different in a minute. So this is not a classical probability distribution. It's more complicated. There are certain transformations that we can make on quantum states that preserve this vector norm property. And we can measure the state, and when we measure it, the square of the amplitude gives us the probability of seeing that state. And this magically only happens on measurement. I say magically because no one really understands why. Quantum physicists do not understand why either. But that's apparently how reality works. And a quantum computer is something that non-trivially uses this complexity of the physics. So it's not just using classical probabilities or classical computation. Next slide. Yeah, so that's what I just said. Only some unitary transformations are efficiently implementable, just like in a conventional computer. You can't magically implement an arbitrary computable function. It has a particular efficiency. And just like in classical computation, we can define simplified models of this and prove that they're universal, so that they only have a polynomial slowdown relative to any possible any other model, basically. Okay, so that'll do for now. I don't need to go into the rest of the slide next. So going back to Simon's algorithm, let's see how to explain this. So it's kind of a type of discrete Fourier transform. So it's converting between the what's it called? The time domain and the frequency domain. So if you think about Simon's problem, that's basically what you need to do, because you have this function that you can query as a black box, and you want to get some information about the shift, which is kind of the input of the function, which you can think of as a frequency, kind of. So what we could do is calculate, so that the setting is the bit strings, right? So the appropriate discrete Fourier transform over that setting is called a Walsh-Hadamard transform. So if you do the Hadamard transform, you get information about the frequencies. But if we just calculated that on the function, then we would have to query it 2 to the n times, and the overall complexity will be 2 to the n times n. So yeah, that's obviously infeasible. But what Simon's algorithm does very efficiently, so in only order n gates, and this notation means sort of no less than n and no greater than n asymptotically. What we do is to compute a superposition over the entries, so that when we measure it, we get some entry with probability of the square of the amplitude. Okay, so next slide. And then we don't really need to look in detail at how the algorithm works, but what the important thing here is very simple, so it only uses very simple operations like this initialize a register to a uniform superposition, and initialize the other register with zeros. You perform the Walsh-Hadamard transform, and then you basically measure the result. Oh, sorry, I said that wrong. You apply the Hadamard transform, and then the function, and then an inverse Hadamard transform, which it's the same function in this case. All right, so what we get at the end for this measurement is the outputs, and I can't explain sort of very quickly. You have to sort of look at a more detailed explanation. But what ends up happening is that you get outputs of the form z such that z dot product s is 0, which you can solve if you have n, where n is the number of bits measurements. Okay, this is just basic linear algebra. And so you get the hidden shift, or in the case of where this is a group algorithm, you get enough information to be able to compute discrete logarithms. Next. Oh, so what was happening there is that we were, so you know the double slit experiment where you end up with an interference pattern on the screen that you're projecting onto. If you turn the intensity down, you can see individual photons, but they kind of cluster in the places where you'd expect from the interference pattern. So that's essentially the same thing that we're doing here, except that they're clustering around the information that you need to compute this discrete algorithm. And so to answer the question you asked before, when will we have cryptographically relevant quantum computers, or rather, will we be able to build quantum computers that are big enough to solve real cryptographic problems? So I think yes, because the experiments that we've done are consistent with being able to put enough atoms in superposition to be able to build a computer, at least potentially. So 16 micrograms, it's really big, 10 to the 17 atoms. And some complexity about the interpretation of this experiment, and are you putting it in superposition in the right sense? But yeah, we basically have to assume that quantum computers are possible, that they can solve cryptographic problems, and we're going to talk about sort of how long that will be. The next slide. Okay, so what this is saying is these are estimates from German Information Security Office about basically the complexity of quantum algorithms for solving various sizes of discrete log. And the actual numbers aren't so important as the fact that we know the numbers. So we know how big a quantum circuit would have to be to solve discrete logarithms of a given size. So we're interested in n equals 256 mainly here. Okay, next. So the best estimate I can find, basically the only person who stuck their neck out and has sufficient knowledge about the field that I can be confident that it's not an overly optimistic for cryptographers estimate, is Dan Bernstein, and he estimates so 2032 for public demos, 2029, which is it's 3 years for well-funded private attacks. And that's not for things that are actually deployed. It is for not quite toy problems that are big enough that they are convincing that they could scale up. And so if you have an attack like that, even if it's not big enough to attack deployed cryptography, you have a problem because you have a confidence problem in your cryptocurrency or your private messenger or whatever. And that is why people are cryptographers are so concerned about this, because we know how long it takes to deploy new crypto. Let's see, we had some questions in the chat. What kind of maths? Okay, so this is basically asking about post-quantum cryptography. So public key cryptography that isn't susceptible to these attacks. We'll talk about that later in the presentation. Okay, next. Oh, sorry, stay on the slide for a little bit. Because so what we need to do is stop creating quantum vulnerable outputs, which means that so any protocol will produce it didn't actually belong to anybody, or we steal it from someone. And these are the relevant security properties in the middle, the primitives needed to gain those properties on the right. Well, actually, signatures should be highlighted here if we're talking about SWIND authentication. That's a bug. So go to the cryptographic problems, and we're mainly interested in discrete log on the Pallas elliptic curve and the Vesta elliptic curve for proofs. The thing about proofs is you can grade the proof system later, because so when someone publishes a transaction, everyone is checking the proof immediately, and so a quantum adversary needs to be able to forge a proof that everyone will check immediately. And so when you upgrade to quantum algorithms, you change the proof system, and then as long as it's not vulnerable at that point, then you're okay. It's not that, so an adversary can't go back in time and prove something using their quantum computer that you're going to verify now. But in the case of commitments, so we are creating notes that then need to be spent at some time in the future. And if at that time someone has a quantum computer that can break discrete log, then they're going to be able to forge the funds regardless of when the note was actually created. So even if the note was created before they had the quantum computer. For spend authentication, so again, it's like proofs. So basically, the thing that we need to solve for quantum recoverability is mainly this commitment issue. It does also affect spend authentication because in Zcash, so in Sapling or Orchard, the spend authentication is split between the circuit and the signatures. And so we need to know that we would be able to do the circuit part of it securely. I'm going to stop there and see if anyone has any questions. Nope, doesn't sound like it. Okay, next. Oh, I guess, does everyone know what the commitment scheme is? Okay, I'll just briefly explain what commitment schemes are. So it's basically like a randomized hash function in that, so the idea is to get two security properties. So hiding, so the output does not reveal anything about the input, and that's what the randomization is for. And binding, which means that you can't produce two distinct inputs, regardless of the randomness, that produce the same commitment. So that the commitment can be used as kind of a short tag for the input. But one that doesn't directly reveal what the input is, but you can check it. And so that's how we prove in Zcash that a note was actually created in the past by a previous transaction. So we put all of the note commitments in a Merkle tree, and then we prove that we're spending some note in that Merkle tree, and that's some in zero knowledge, so we don't know which note. And so obviously if the yeah, so that's explaining what commitments are. So the conventional wisdom on how to upgrade protocols to achieve some degree of quantum resistance is that you should focus on privacy first. And the rationale for that is that you're producing ciphertexts now, which an adversary will be able to decrypt later. But as I said, if you generalize that, what matters is that you're producing any output at all now that an adversary will be able to exploit later. Encryption is just one special case of that. And so if you generalize that argument, you should be worrying about any protocol that produces outputs that will be vulnerable later. Okay. Yeah, next. So the consequences of this kind of attack is that users might lose all of their funds if you have to turn off a protocol because you can no longer rely on it. Just like it, so in the case of Sprout, we were using a proof system that turned out to be unsound, and so we had to switch to a different proof system, which we did under the cover of the Sapling upgrade, in order to fix that vulnerability. And so in a similar situation, we would have some hard choices, because if the reason why the balance violation flaw exists is that essentially a whole range of public key cryptography has all been broken at the same time, then you're in a very difficult position with how you do the upgrade. It's not that you can just change a specific component like the brief system. Okay, so we have to plan for this. And so the way I've suggested to plan for this is to make sure that new outputs will have some alternative way of proving that they're correct that doesn't depend on discrete logarithm. Okay, and that's what ZIP 2005 is. Next. So I mentioned the BC3 14 soundness bug. There was another bug that nearly happened, and it was fixed before we launched, and is even closer to being analogous to what would happen with a practical quantum computer. So it was called the internal H bug, planned by Taylor. So you it's work. Just a second. Bear with me.
How's everybody feeling? Thumbs up, following along, making sense in a general sense in any way? Good.
Okay, all good. So yes, so we had to change this commitment scheme in order to fix the problem. It's a relatively simple fix, because basically the designers of Zcash had sort of tried to get one security property that they wanted, and had ended up compromising another. So it's just a mistake, and could be easily fixed. But the consequences of it, if it hadn't been fixed, is you would have this sort of 264, which is difficult but feasible attack that could have forged currency. Okay, so next. Yeah, and how the attack works, if you have a problem with the commitment scheme, is you find both a low-valued note and a high-valued note that have the same commitment. So you can output one, which you can sort of spend a low-valued input, produce a low-valued note, and then you can spend the high-valued. You can spend it as though it was high-valued. So it's just an arbitrary balance violation. And like I say, it's not sufficient to just change the proof system, because it affects the structure of all previous notes. And so you no longer have enough information to tell who owns which node. Next. So it takes a long time to deploy crypto. And we've seen this with CSAs, for example. So we thought they would be deployed much sooner than they have been. They've kind of been derailed a little bit by other considerations, like, we had to insert NU 6.1, and so we Zcash deprecation took a lot longer than we thought, and so on. So there are some, for example, very optimistic estimates floating around about how long it will take for us to deploy Tachyon. I'm quite skeptical of those, but in general, any crypto takes at least twice as long to deploy as you think it will. And so 3 years, if we take Bernstein's estimate for private attacks, is not very long at all. And so anything we can do to improve the resistance to future attacks without having to do a lot of reanalysis of the existing protocol is a good idea, I think. Apparently people agree with me because quantum recoverability sort of polled highest on the recent community polls. Okay, next. So how do we fix this? So remember those commitments. If we look at the detail of how they're constructed, they're basically Pedersen commitments. And a Pedersen commitment is you have 2 base points in your elliptic curve, G and H. You multiply H by the randomness and G by the input, add those together, and that's your commitment. And the reason why this works is that, so if, as long as X is less than the order of G, then that's a unique point. And then you don't know the discrete logarithm relation between G and H. And therefore, you have to, well, this is hand waving a little bit. You have to be able to compute a discrete log to find 2x that produce the same commitment. You don't know the relation between X and R that would do that. Now, but if you can compute discrete logs, then you know the discrete log of G with respect to H, and that allows you to forge because you can choose, you can pick 2 different X, that can actually be arbitrary X, and then you can choose the correct R to make this sum cancel out and give the same commitment. So that's bad. How do we fix it? So remember, we don't want to change the circuit because we don't want to have to reanalyze the circuit or re-influence it. And so we can't actually change the commitment, but we can use the fact that this R is an external input to the circuit. So for example, in note commitments, this is actually RCM. And so if we compute RCM differently, then we have the same function that we're checking inside the circuit. But it turns out that we can also check it post-quantumly because we can check how R is constructed. So we set R to be equal to a hash. So effectively a post-quantum commitment to X with R prime, which is which is the new randomizer, basically. And then we use that as the old randomizer into the circuit. So as long as we check this hash, it turns out that we end up with a post-quantum binding commitment. There are some details that we need to make sure. The order of G and H must be large prime, well, they are. The hash function must have certain properties, must be independent of the elliptic curve. And then, so how you get this this formula here is, so you're trying to, the adversary is trying to find a collision. So that's some x1 and r1 and x2 and r2 such that the commitments are the same. So now if we take the discrete logarithm with respect to base h and rearrange it a little bit, just using high school sort of algebra, then we get this equation. And so this is necessary and sufficient for hashes to collide. And then we can observe that if hash behaves randomly, then we don't expect to be able to find such an x1 and x2 to be able to make this true, because we're basically saying that it has to have a specific structure that we don't expect it to have. And this is true for kind of hashes that can be treated as random functions. Okay. And so the advantage of doing it this way is that we don't have to change the circuit at all. So we just change the way RCM is computed, which is outside the circuit, and that's we have to do that now, and then we will check it in the recovery circuit later. So when we're forced to actually defend against a quantum computer, we can change the circuit so that it checks this hash as well, and then that will be post-quantum secure. Next. So there are actually two places we need to do this, because we use these commitments in two places. So one's the note commitments, which is what I've been focusing on. And we also use them to compute IVKs, the incoming viewing key, from the full viewing key. So I've oversimplified a little, because these are not actually Pedersen commitments, they're Sinsemia commitments. Sinsemia is a scheme that I think it was Jack Rigg and I can't remember which of Sean Strad and I, well, I was definitely positive it was one of those two. I think it was Strad. Invented the scheme to optimize Pedersen commitments by making use of lookups in the circuit. So we had Halo 2, which supported lookups. And so we could do this optimization to reduce the circuit size. We have a proof that this is, in some sense, equivalent to a Pedersen commitment with different inputs. So that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter for the purpose of post-quantum security. Okay. Yeah, and we need to, there's another optimization that Sinsemia does, which is that elliptic curve arithmetic has some special cases for the points of infinity and for points with the same x coordinate that you have to, you would normally have to treat specially, but it's expensive to have to handle those special cases in the circuit. So we just don't, because we can argue under the assumption that a discrete logarithm is hard, that those cases have negligible probability of occurring. But in the face of an adversary that can compute discrete logarithms, that breaks down. So you now can't do that optimization. But that's fine. It just makes the recovery circuit a bit more expensive. And the cost is still reasonable, especially computers will get faster. We can make other optimizations. And so it is going to be a reasonable cost. Next. And we only have to do it in order to recover Orchard notes. We can have our main protocol can be more efficient. Okay. So this is used a weird glyph, row. That's not the glyph that we normally use for row. Never mind. Okay. So it turns out that we already compute RCM as the output of a hash function. So we just have to change its input. We have to sort of commit to more things post-quantumly. And this is basically all of the fields in the note plain text. including the asset base, which is needed for ZSAs. So it turns out that we might as well include the asset base now, in case ZSAs activate. And even if they never activate, then the cost of that is quite acceptable. And the advantage there is that the upgrade to ZSAs, if it happens, will be much simpler. Okay. Also, lead byte is basically a version for the note plaintext. We want to commit to that so that some cross-format attacks will be easier to analyze. So we can change the note plaintext again in future, and sort of it'll be easier to analyze the security of that. Okay, next. Right, so that was note commitments. We have to do basically the same thing for this commit IVK function. And this is a little bit more complicated because how this works is RIVK, which is the randomizer for this commitment, is computed from the secret key via an expensive hash function. So we will have to put that expensive hash function in the, which is plate 2B, in the recovery circuit. It's okay, it's fine. But a disadvantage of that is that it doesn't work very well for hardware wallets. It puts the expensive part of the circuit in what needs to be done by the hardware wallet. So as an alternative to deriving the keys this way, we also allow them to be derived in another way, so that the hardware wallet only has to prove the relationship between this QSK and QK. So it has to compute one hash function, and it also has to compute the commitment, but that we can choose whatever commitment scheme we want later. Okay, so that works. It's a little bit hairy and complicated, but I think it's worth it for not having to change the circuit now and basically being able to reuse all of the classical analysis. We do have to do some post-quantum specific analysis on whether this actually works. As another wrinkle where we don't just, so this RIVK that we computed from SK is external. So there are basically two zip32 branches of the key tree. It works like the change and normal outputs in bit 32. So the equivalent of that for shielded is external and internal keys, and we have to have the recovery circuit account for both. Yeah, it's just an annoying complication, but it doesn't actually, it's just one extra hash function, basically. Next. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of deployment? So what we're doing is making use of how key generation was defined in the protocol spec. Well, previously that wasn't enforced. So if a wallet wanted to do it differently, they would still be compatible with the rest of the Zcash ecosystem. They would be doing something that isn't recommended, but it would still work. But now that's not sufficient, because we know that in future we're going to check that key derivation, and so we'll be relying on it being a specific derivation. And so wallets would actually better do it as specified. Almost certainly they are doing it as specified. It's just that we have to audit whether that's actually the case. And there's also some requirements on frost keygen to make that work. I can go into sort of implications for Frost in more detail if people are interested in that, but it's not in the slides. Okay, and so because Frost degen hasn't been specified yet, it will be specified in ZIP 312, which isn't finalized. We have an opportunity to specify how that works in a compatible way. The other thing that will be necessary is, so there'll be a V6 transaction format. And the current plan is that that will be an extensible format that allows different types of called bundles for different shielded protocols or functionality like memo bundles. And so that is going to need to be supported by wallets. And also the computation of these of RCM is different and will have to be supported by wallets. So what we're doing to simplify deployment is proposing to tie that to the transaction version. So our V6 transactions will compute it in the new way. And so all Orchard V6 outputs will be quantum recoverable, but other outputs will not be. So if your wallet is still producing V5 transactions, then those will not be recoverable. So what we want to do is for all wallets to switch to V6 as soon as possible. But obviously, we can't force wallet implementers to do anything. There are certain things where if they don't upgrade, the wallets will break. But we can't force them to produce V6 transactions without. So historically, there has been an upgrade at Sapling where we forced implementers to switch to the new transaction format, and they complained bitterly. So I think it's not proposed to do that. But in this case, if they stick with V5 transactions, then they won't get the recoverability advantage. So yeah, we will be kind of pressuring wallets to upgrade. If they don't if they don't understand an incoming V6 transaction, then they won't see those incoming funds. And so really they need to understand that before the upgrade, which again, that happened with Sapling. It's not insurmountable, but it is a potential issue. And the funds aren't lost because the wallet, so if a wallet doesn't understand those transactions in time for the upgrade, it can always be upgraded later, but it has to rescan since NU7 or whatever the upgrade that introduced these transactions is. Do you have any questions?
I got a question. In regards to Frost, you mentioned that the specification is not yet complete, but I do know there are various demos of Frost available today.
Yeah,
So
yeah, there are
those
demos.
compatible or are they not compatible? And
They're not compatible. So yes, the keys that you have produced using those demos will not produce quantum recoverable notes. So that they will still work until the quantum apocalypse. And then if you haven't moved those funds, then those funds are at risk. So yeah, as long as you're aware of that and you're aware that you're using a demo and it doesn't have this recoverability property, then that's fine. By all means, use the demo, but it shouldn't be deployed until this has been finalized. I mean, it's a matter of days before I follow the PR to fix this.
Okay, I got one more question.
Go on.
V6 transactions, is that live now or is that an upcoming release?
So my expectation is that that will be deployed in an E7. So we just had the sentiment poll for sort of features for NE7, and there was a divergence between what essentially all of the individual polling said and what the coin holder polling said. So quantum recoverability itself was popular in both kinds of poll, and explicit fees was fine, tachyon was fine, and there was disagreement on pretty much everything else. So the NSM is complicated because the coin holders sort of voted in a confusing way. But that's NSM is not really relevant to what we're talking about here. What might be relevant is memo bundles. So this is actually on one of the next slides. I'd originally assumed that memo bundles would be activated at the same time as quantum recoverability. And there's some advantages to doing it that way. And that would mean that we only have to do one note plaintext format upgrade. It will be compatible with activating ZSAs later because it would include the asset base field. And so note plaintext upgrades are complicated and hairy because so there was a case where we got it wrong at Canopy, and we ended up with Wallace interoperability problems, and sort of wallets had to temporarily violate the spec in order to record people's funds. So we don't want that to happen again. Yeah, I think have I answered the question? Okay, next slide. Yeah, so this is actually some of the detail that I was talking about there. So this new note plaintext format is needed because we're computing RCM. Well, it's needed for three reasons. One is that we're computing RCM differently. So, so receivers of plaintext need to know when to do that different computation. And then memo bundles change the format because they're putting a key into the what is currently the memo field instead of the actual memo, and then the ciphertext is in a different bundle, and then the asset base is added for CSAs. And we don't have to activate ZSAs at the same time, just have to reserve this asset base field. And so, as I said just now, at the Canopy upgrade, we made a mistake because so we didn't change the transaction version, but we did change the note plaintext format. And what happened is that wallets some wallets just did the consensus branch ID update and didn't change how they handled note plaintexts. And that's what led to funds not being accessible. If you kind of synchronize all this and you change the note plaintext format for V6 transactions and leave it the same for V5 transactions, that's much less risky because there isn't a way to just update the consensus branch ID and not changing anything else and end up with silent failure. And part of the reason that that's an implausible failure mode is that the V6 ciphertext won't be big enough to make that mistake. So because we're moving the memo from the note ciphertext to a separate ciphertext, replacing it with a key, that makes the note ciphertext smaller, and so there isn't enough room to fit the data to do it wrong. You're essentially forced to make all of the changes or nothing works. And so I don't think implementers are going to kind of guess what the spec should be. They're going to run into this problem and then actually read the spec, hopefully, anyway. And there will be test vectors. Okay. Next slide. Oh, actually, previous slide, because there's a detail here. If we don't put memo bundles in the same upgrade as quantum recoverability, then that argument doesn't hold. We can still do it, but I guess we just have to audit all wallets more thoroughly. Anyway, so I had actually designed it that way intentionally, and then this sentiment polling where the coin holders or the coin holder vote, which is a sort of less than 8% of actual coin holders, so was anti MOA bundles for reasons that I don't know. So part of the problem, in my view, with coin holder voting is that you don't actually get to know who is voting against something and what their reasons are. And that's something that we will have to investigate. We'll have to just ask the whales who voted against, why did you vote against MOA bundles? Is it a good enough reason to not do them at the same time and get this advantage? Anyway, next. Yeah, so it should be mostly transparent to users, but so it won't be the case that all of their funds become quantum recoverable at the same time. So after the quantum transition, so the wallets will have to recover the old notes using a different circuit, which is going to be distinguishable and possibly quite sort of slow relative to normal spends. And it is possible for wallets to get the spec wrong in a way that ends up with the funds being bad. And so we're going to have to, so wallets that use Libra Zcash should be fine, because Libra Zcash is doing all of the cryptography, and it's thoroughly reviewed and tested against, checked against test vectors and so on. But if wallets are implementing their own crypto, then they're going to have to be reviewed very thoroughly for that, especially the key generation. So we talked about Frost. This applies to key generation in general because we're going to be checking it in the recovery circuit. And the test vectors will be published in plenty of time. Next. Okay, so no recoverability for sapling threat or transparent pools. So this, in principle, we could define a similar change for sapling, but I think it doesn't make sense to, because we would have to, there's a bunch of stuff that would have to be analyzed separately for sapling. And so the bandwidth of doing that analysis is a significant constraint, because we only have a few people who understand the protocol well enough. And so if we just do it for Orchard, then we get most of the benefit, but wallets will essentially have to move users' funds to Orchard to take advantage of this. So there's a question as to whether we need to support recoverability for transparent funds. And so in my opinion, all funds should be held shielded. That's still compatible with using exchanges that only support transparent. sort of interoperating with wallets that support transparent. But I mean, if you're using Zashi or using Zingo, for example, then you're already holding all of your funds shielded, except temporarily when you receive some funds and you have to shield them. So there are, for example, exchanges hold a lot of their funds as transparent. And they may argue, I don't know what's actually correct or not, but there are regulatory reasons for doing that. Or they may argue that, for example, they use HSMs that don't support shielded functionality. So there's a question here as to whether we should have a way of holding funds for the long term transparently. I don't think it's necessary. I think everyone should just move everything into Orchard. And in the long term, that's, HSM is hardware security module. And the thing about HSMs is that they usually only support kind of conservative in the sense that it was designed by NIST or something, standardized by NIST. Crypto, occasionally they will support things like SEC-P256K1. But yeah, they're not going to support Palace or Vesta, for example. And so, I mean, maybe some of the more flexible ones could be upgraded to do that, but there are still going to be a lot of HSMs in use that don't support that. And that's actually the reason why the issuance keys for ZSAs are SEC-P256K1, so that they can specifically be stored in, be used in HSMs. So what do people think in general about whether it's necessary to hold funds in the long term transparently?
I think we should move shielded. I think I kind of like I see a parallel with, remember when we had the digital TV transition, we had analog and digital, and then the government basically said we got to go all digital. I'm assuming if quantum computers become a thing, something similar will happen with crypto, and they'll force the issue. So, but I don't know the details and the politics of it, but I think just my overall thoughts are, yeah, we should shoot for that.
Yeah, I mean, you can always give people a viewing key if you need that for regulatory reasons. Anyway. Next. Oh yes, okay. I think this is the last slide. So it's the next slide after this one. The question, yeah, okay, go back to this one. Okay, so this is just reiterating that Orchard outputs of V6 transactions specifically can be quantum recoverable. So that includes all ZSAs, so all custom assets if those are deployed. Presumably any new pools after Orchard will be quantum recoverable, or completely post-quantum. And so a wallet will be able to tell what proportion of its users' funds are quantum recoverable. It can prioritize non-recoverable notes for spending, just to accelerate the process of making more funds recoverable. But so a constraint here is that so for hardware wallets, for example, there's user interaction needed in order to spend funds. So that makes it a little bit difficult to just automatically migrate. For software wallets, you could just automatically migrate all funds to Orchard immediately if you wanted. Or you could have some intermediate policy where you do it opportunistically to start with, and then after a certain point, you just auto-migrate. So, but we won't be able to tell what proportion of Orchard funds are recoverable from the outside, we will be able to tell how many outputs are, how many Orchard outputs of E6. We'll be able to tell how much value is in non-recoverable pools. So we can tell in general how well the deployment is going. And we can obviously see the total shielded proportion. Yeah, we won't know for certain that all outputs are recoverable at any point. And that's just a trade-off of not adding a new pool. So at some point we will add a new pool for tachyon. One of the conclusions of the sentiment polls was that people thought that was a good idea. And so everything in that new pool will be recoverable. Yeah, but there will be some uncertainty about sort of how much of the overall supply is recoverable. Okay. Yeah, and we won't be able to tell whether there are wallets with non-conformant keygen. And so if they aren't conformant, then we could find that we switch off the Orchard protocol and oops, people have lost funds. And this is why so auditing how wallets do keygen is going to be important. Okay, and that's it. Any more questions?
That was awesome, guys. Thank you so much. That was a lot of great information.
Cool. Yeah. If anyone has, so we could go through the detail. We could have a look at ZIP 2005. And there's a flow diagram there, which kind of all of those slides were text. There are very few sort of figures, but if you see the flow diagram, then some things make more sense, I think. So yeah, go down to this potential recovery circuit. Okay, so all of the thin lines here were present before. So that's basically a summary of what the protocol was before. Just all of the derivations from these inputs. So the keygen is not in this diagram. And it includes some details that are specific to ZSAs, like split nodes. The heavy lines going into pre-RCM, those are the things that we need to add. So you can see that the change is sort of relatively simple and self-contained. Relative to the existing protocol. There's basically only one function that needs to change. And so this is a reasonable upgrade to make and a reasonable amount of analysis that needs to be done. And the circuit itself doesn't change. So what we're seeing here is just the changes to note commitments. If you scroll down, yeah, scroll down a bit more to the other diagram, I think. Yeah, this one. Okay, so remember I said that so usually in the existing protocol, NK, AK, and RIVK are derived from, sorry, it's not this diagram, it's the one below. This one, yeah. Okay, so normally SK, NK, and RIVK legacy are derived from SK, so it's the cream box on the right. And then, so ASK here is the signing private key, essentially. So AK is the signing public key. and then we put all of those through a hash function, and we get RIVK. No, normally we just have the big cream box here. What's outside the box is what we've added for efficiency in hardware wallets. So yeah, we've made sure that the hardware wallet only has to compute this cream box on the left here, so it only has to compute HQK. And then it has to link that to the rest of the proof, which it does via a linking commitment. And so, which is a standard technique that's used in other protocols. And so that's minimizing the size of the circuit that has to be proven by the hardware wallet. So currently, in Sapling and Orchard, hardware wallets only have to compute signatures, which is very cheap. They will have to compute proofs. Alternatively, we could switch to a post-quantum signature scheme. But the thing is that post-quantum signature schemes for signing are also expensive. So yeah, the thing about this is that we can specify it now, and it's very conservative. We don't have to worry about, for example, ML-DSA being broken or something like that. Yeah. And then the diagram above this was for Frost. We go back up to that. Yeah, before. Okay, so again, we would support using hardware wallets with Frost, and in that case, you would compute the red DSA public key AK using the Frost distributed key generation, and then you compute RIVK using that and the notify key and QK. And so we've covered all of the possibilities of using Frost on its own, using hardware wallets on its own, or using both.
Awesome. It's we're at about 90 minutes now. Just wanted to call the time.
I think, yeah. So unless we have any questions that can be answered quickly, we should probably stop there.
Okay, cool. And you can reach out to either of us online. Also, if you have questions after this. And
we do have a few sort of very short questions. Why are some boxes green?
Yeah.
The green boxes are sort of functions. So the boxes with secular outlines, they're values, and these are functions, usually hash functions. The darker green one is a hash function that has to be computed by a circuit. And the tachyon pool, I don't think we have time to address that problem. So let's discuss that offline.
No, you answered it actually when you were talking about on that slide. So disregard that.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, cool.
awesome. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Pay attention to the next announcements and the next polling on what the next topic is going to be. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you again, Daira Emma. This was awesome. Super informative.
You're welcome.
All right. Bye, folks.
Mathematical symphony. From big on dreams to something more. We built the walls behind the door. From pioneer to reference. The proof is trust, the code, the essence. Zcash keeps the promise alive.